So as the Iran war continues to wage with continuous rounds of escalation over the Strait of Hormuz, whilst peace talks seemingly go nowhere, there have been some quiet revelations happening inside about how the Iranian military got to where it was. And no one's really been paying much attention to them. You see, this isn't around battlefield footage or official statements. It's not even propaganda, actually, but actually internal journals, essays, and training manuals that have been written by some of the officers now leading at the very front over Iran's new strategy. And when you start reading those, a very different kind of a picture of Iran begins to emerge. Certainly different to what we've been claimed to hear. Far more adaptive, far more actually self-critical, but is more crucially far more strategic and focused in a way longer term that we never really thought about for the IRGC. Now compare that to the United States, which in a revelationary report has been clear about just how impulsive and reactionary Trump has been, specifically Trump. Because whilst Iran has been studying modern warfare in painstaking detail, Washington, or specifically Trump, has been operating purely, not even on instinct, just impulse and the sense of political pressure. So in this video, I wanted to break down what Iran's military learned from different conflicts, but specifically Ukraine, what it reveals about how they've been thinking, and why this real story is about not, say, the Iranian military or the relationship between the United States and Iran, but how smaller players are increasingly capable of taking on the big ones, and in some ways effectively coming out on top. Let's break into this one because it's really quite fascinating.
This is the Global Gambit.
How you going, everyone? Welcome to the channel, where if you're new, well, I don't normally have this backdrop, but I'm actually in New York City, having flown stateside for a couple of exciting events, which I'm hoping will lead to some even more exciting events, engagements, conversations, and content in the coming days and weeks. Lots I'm working on in the background here. But in the time that I haven't been posting in the past few days, we've obviously seen another, well, what I consider a bit of a circle jerk, bit of a circus of attempts to effectively pursue peace talks. While things seem to be improving between the Israeli-Lebanon front, that is not enough to reassure or make the IRGC and Iran feel that the talks with them and the United States are really going anywhere. So we've got talks planned for tomorrow at the time of recording, and hopefully we may see an end to all of this. But I want to know from you guys how you feel about the current state of things, the current state of play, the strategic decisions being made, and let me know in the comments. Because for this video, I was reading and just reflecting on some critical differences between the strategic planning, the strategic thinking, the modus operandi of Tehran versus the United States, or more specifically the Trump administration. And that's what I want to get into here. You see, for years, Iran's military has been seen through a relatively predictable lens. The idea of asymmetric warfare, proxy networks, plausible deniability, missiles, drones, a force designed not to dominate conventionally, but to complement, disrupt, and to overall deter. But beneath that surface, something more deliberate has been happening, and it's come to light in recent weeks. A sustained effort to really meticulously study modern warfare, not in theory, but through the real live conflicts we've seen in the past few years. And nowhere has that been clearer than in how Iranian commanders dissected the war in Ukraine. We've seen a lot of loose connections between the two, but it shows you now just how intertwined these two have been, more than we ever thought. At the centre of this effort is a relatively obscure individual, Hossein Dadvand. He is a commander that has run a key combat college just north of Tehran, and his job was quite simple, but critical: to train thousands of IRG soldiers, not to just how to fight, but how to win mentally, strategically. In the lead up to Iran's confrontation with Israel and the United States, Danvard had likened this with the obsessive analysis over Ukraine, systematically breaking it apart in the past 4 years. In one article, he outlined what Iran needed to change to invest in those drones, shift to smaller and much more mobile units, modernize training, and integrate AI into weapon systems, something that the United States in some ways isn't yet doing. None of this on its own is revolutionary, you might argue, but it's the collective approach that signals something crucial here. Iran was not just observing war, it was trying to absorb and adapt in any case scenario where they would be at conflict, and they have been now for effectively 2 months. So what makes this even more striking is where these ideas have been appearing. You see, it's not like in classified reports from the DoD or Pentagon, but actually just in publicly accessible materials. Over 300 articles across different defense publications written by commanders, officers, and academics. These journals are not just educational, they're strategic signaling tools. They are handbooks. They allow the different factions within the IOGC, let alone the Artesh or Besiege movements, to test the ideas, to compete for the influence and shape the doctrine. So when the same themes appear repeatedly, be that drones, AI, cyber warfare, operational flexibility, you're not just seeing theory, you're seeing the direction, and it demonstrates just how much the IRGC have been the critical underpinning drivers of the state of Iran for so many years, more so than arguably the supreme leader was. Now, these directions have been heavily shaped by Ukraine itself. Dad Vand himself said that the war was studied very particularly, with the most important takeaway the use of small, cheap, scalable technology. Ukraine has demonstrated that the relatively low cost drones that have been produced at scale in-house in Ukraine have been able to offset any previously established idea of conventional disadvantages. That adaptability can matter much more than just the sheer firepower. Iran's response has been therefore to focus on mass production, the decentralization, and even 3D printing of drones in some cases. Couple this with a growing emphasis on cyber warfare, the AI integration, and much more faster decision making because of that decentralization, you see where this happens and escalates very quickly. The most important lesson about all of this wasn't technological, it was the psychological switch. Because Ukraine forced Iran to confront its own weaknesses, something by comparison in the Soviet or Russian doctrine really isn't very common and still very much behind the times, because buried within Iran's journals is a consistent theme, one of concern on security. Senior IRGC commanders have openly questioned Iran's preparedness, its planning, and its ability to respond to emerging threats. Ever since 2023, two former army chiefs warned that Iran needed to urgently reform, with more specialization, better training, and a shift towards advanced technologies, no longer resting on laurels of the proxy networks even. The implications being clear that Iran was not ready for any real kind of war that it might face, and that they knew that. That this is not the picture of a blind, confident military power, but one of actively trying to grow, adapt, and address their shortcomings. It's a learning curve in a way that we don't see in other countries. Indeed, the United States, for example. Contrast that with how decisions have been reportedly being made in the Trump administration. Not over the past few years, of course, Trump wasn't in power then, over the past 2 months. According to the Wall Street Journal, United States President Trump approached this conflict in a far more just simply improvised and inconsistent way. Key decisions were made on the fly without full consultation with advisors, and his focus often narrowed to immediate tactical metrics, vanity projects, how many targets could be destroyed, how dramatic that footage looks. When we hear the DoD or whatever stating that they have destroyed 11,000 targets, what does that mean? Officials have described this emphasis on spectacle rather than long-term strategy. So when 2 US pilots are shot down a couple of weeks ago, Trump goes absolutely ballistic, shouting at his aides for hours. His own team limited in its presence in the Situation Room, believing his impatience would not be helpful, his recklessness, his literal throwing the toys out of the plan. Communication has been, well, not just erratic, but non-existent. Uncoordinated media appearances and the contradictory messaging that people thought was all part of smoke and mirrors. No, it's not. It's purely Trump out absolutely of his comfort zone. He has threatened Iran with vulgar language and the religious phrases that Trump admitted himself he used deliberately to try and appear unpredictable and force negotiations. The guy's been seeking negotiations for the past month. Major strategic realities also appeared to catch Washington off guard. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important energy choke points globally, reportedly surprised officials in both its speed and effectiveness. Trump himself is said to have remarked on how easily a guy with a drone could shut it down, in which many ways mirrors exactly the lesson that Iran has already internalized from watching Ukraine for years. At the same time, Trump's attention was frequently pulled towards the domestic politics, the media appearances, and the desire not to have his personal reputation questioned. even as deadlines for Iran's negotiations approach. The U-turning, the taco, the flip-flopping. It's even worse than many of us could have remotely begun to imagine. Back in Iran, debates have been playing out, but in a very structured way. Different branches of the military pushing competing priorities, whether to invest in expensive equipment like Russia's Su-35 fighter jets, or double down on the drones and more nimble asymmetric tools. These debates have been visible, but they were part of a system actively trying to adapt, not simply in chaos. In contrast, US side has appeared less divided on priorities, but more consistent in the execution. It's all well and good if you can talk about it, or if you can't follow that through with action, then it's all kind of meaningless. There's not lacking capability, but lacking coherence. If you don't have a coherent strategic plan, then no matter how powerful your military is, you do not have any chance of being able to systematically and firmly incapacitate or decapitate the Iranian regime, which was the objective of this whole thing. Iran's journals reveal how Iran planned to fight, be that in the Strait of Hormuz, the preference on confrontation, disruption, applying pressure through escalation and sticking points. What I've been saying from the beginning. Against amphibious threats, the focus shifts to deterrence, particularly the mine laying in coastal waters. These are low-cost tools designed to complicate, slow them down, not about trying to destroy them outright. This is classic Iranian doctrine, but it is being updated and refined, integrating lessons from smaller states taking on seemingly and assumed much bigger, powerful ones. Now, don't get me wrong, not all of Iran's approach has been flawless, and they are certainly overwhelmed in the air by Israel and America. Now, even if the flawed analysis reveals that there are shortcomings, what it does emphasize, though, is a growth mindset. Many papers portray the US as the weakened and distracted party, creating opportunities for Iran to reshape the region, the narrative, and even speak to players like the Gulf states in a more constructive sense. There are clear anxieties about internal cohesion, neighbouring threats, the systemic weakness of the IRGC and the country now. But what emerges is not blind confidence. It's a mixture of long-term calculations with an unsurprising but perhaps important degree of insecurity because of how it is leveraged in towards adapting and modernizing, not simply just reacting and panicking. Some of the most revealing insights go beyond strategy entirely. They focus on the life within the IOGC, mental health issues, discrimination with academia, problems in military hospitals, and structured inefficiencies. And these might sound like minute details, but they point to the deeper institutional challenges that affect how Iran sustains its military over time, both within a wartime footing right now, but also in the day after tomorrow when talks finally achieve some kind of comprehensive ceasefire and we perhaps see an end to this current round of engagement, because unfortunately it may well come back. All that being said, therefore, when you take a step back, the picture becomes much clearer. Iran has been learning systematically from real-world conflicts and actively trying to move ahead. It is more self-aware than often assumed and openly identifying its own weaknesses, not in some insecure way, but as a sense of how can we address these, how can we better them. And its doctrine does evolve, not by abandoning the asymmetrical warfare, but by adapting it. In contrast, the United States, led by the current man in power, highlights a different kind of risk. Not one of pure absolute power, but of one with absolute no strategic alignment, coherency, or long-termism. Moments where short-term reactions override that long-term planning and the dismissal of people with years of experience, those who actually know what they're talking about, are simply poo-pooed on as, we don't have time for experts. Experts exist for a reason. People specialize in things for reasons. Modern warfare is no longer just about firepower. It's about how quickly and effectively you learn, as with everything. Iran has been quietly studying, testing, refining its approach, even during the height of battle. And again, not getting carried away that it's sort of immune from challenges or that it's on the back foot in some ways. The point is that the United States, with its overwhelming advantages, has had its decision-making completely diluted and effectively reduced to reactions and inconsistency. And that real tension emerging from the conflict means that whoever does try to push for peace talks can try to emphasize that because of the way that the war has been carried out, depending upon which party you're talking about, they have the real leverage. One side, methodical and adaptive. The other one, improvised, reactive, impulsive. And if that's how they're going to be approaching the day after tomorrow and longer term peace talks to try to avoid this happening again, well, I know who I'd bet my money on to come out ahead. That's it from me, everyone. Let me know in the comments below what you think about this. This is just a few random thoughts that I have pieced together with an interesting article that I'd written, and really got me thinking about the narrative framing, the strategic alignment, the military operational aspects, and, well, of course, the geopolitics of it all. Let me know in the comments. Do like the video if you enjoyed it. Do subscribe if you want to see some exciting things coming up. A couple of senators that I've met, a couple of in-person regulars, some exciting footage. I can't wait to share with you, but we'll see you all next time. Take care.